A limiter is the easiest thing in the world to use. In my opinion, the hard stuff is what you do to it before it hits the limiter. The last chorus should be the loudest, and you need to gain stage everything to that point. How fast or slow your limiter is, or sometimes limiters, has a big effect on the low end and the high end. I kind of don't really care about meters. I don't really find them very interesting. I mean, as long as they're not putting a sound on it, I don't really feel one way or the other about it. The other problem with the people who sort of master specifically for, say, Spotify versus YouTube, and, everybody has a different spec on that stuff. The problem is...
This episode is brought to you by Baby Audio. Today I sit down with DeKline, a 2-time Grammy winner mastering engineer. He has worked with U2, the Pixies, and Lisa Loeb. We talk about how to use limiting effectively and other essential processes that shape the final sound during mastering. Hey Hans, thank you so much for joining us today. Welcome to the show.
Thank you very much, Jose. It's a pleasure to be here.
So the first question to warm up, what's the difference between a good master and a great one?
Ooh. Sometimes just subtlety. I think that the devil is always in the details, and I think particularly dimension, space. It's definitely not volume. Mm-hmm. And I really think volume is one part of it. And I think people often think that that's the main focus on mastering. Been less of a focus on that in the last few years, but to be fair, that's a very dramatic part of mastering, and it always is sort of the first thing people notice is sort of how much something jumps out of the speakers. But I mean, if you're really analyzing and you just take two songs that are of equal volume and sort of look at the dimensionality of them, I think that's the secret sauce,
So you were talking about obtaining space and depth. So how can you do that during mastering?
I mean, it's age-old tricks that have been around forever, but it's mid-side stuff, and just, it's a lot of people just kind of reach for stereoizers and things like that. That's a very blunt instrument. Sometimes just a dash of EQ, sort of scooping out some of the muddy stuff in the sides, adjusting how the sides hit the compressor versus the center, just kind of opens things up, and you don't have to do a lot of artificial, phasey sort of shifting stuff around,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because this is the first time I hear you can gain or obtain a space during mastering, so that's great.
Really? Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, listen, I'm not here to add something that's not there, but I look at mastering as sort of an assist. Like the mixer or the mixer is supposed to kind of make the shot, and I'm just there to make sure it goes in. You know what I mean? If we're gonna compare to basketball, which I know nothing about.
Me neither.
But I know about mastering. So
yeah. Being South American, for me, basketball is not my jam.
Not your forte. Yeah.
Not at all. So I usually end up the show asking questions from the audience, but today I want to start asking them. So the first one is, what are the top signs that a mix isn't ready for mastering?
I mean, if you feel insecure or uncertain about it, that would be the first red flag, and I have conversations with people to make sure, understand, right? When you're mixing, there's a lot of back and forth, and, that's the whole point of that, is to get a feel for what you're doing, but where things are going to sit and what's supposed to be there and what isn't. Those, the conversation about instrumentation and stuff like that should not be happening at the mastering stage. So oftentimes people go, oh, I was expecting the chorus to be more exciting, and I think it's because I'm missing parts, So that would be number one, is that make sure that you have all the parts that you want in there before you send it to me.
Uh-huh. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I'm sorry, I have my questions here.
That's okay.
So, do you usually do just one version of the mastering, or do you prefer to create something special for streaming?
Oh yeah, I don't do different masters.
Mm-hmm.
The reason is that you would end up doing 10 different specs and it just doesn't make any sense. Generally speaking, the other problem with the people who sort of master specifically for say Spotify versus YouTube, and everybody has a different spec on that stuff. The problem is none of that is universal and guaranteed to be there in 3 days, much
Mm-hmm.
less a year or 2 years. So um, a great master is a great master, transcends time, it transcends the service that you're using. Um, how it hits on specific services is entirely up to those services, and it's all arbitrary. They're going to change the rules tomorrow. Um, that's why remastering exists, right? I mean, we've remastered formats. How many times now are we into remasters from starting from even back in the 1920s?
Mm-hmm.
So that's part of the deal. Nothing is forever, but a great master fits the bill for the age that it's in. And if it needs to be revisited 20 years from now, so be it. But having 10 different formats for the same song is ridiculous. They're going to change that on you. And, you're going to see your song redlining and on some services and not others. And it really just kind of boils down to if it sounds great to begin with, it's going to be fine.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree 100% with that. Do you use saturation or distortion in your mastering process?
Um, it's sort of like I use, it's sort of like asking a chef, do they use seasoning? Yes, but um, if you have to rely on that, you're doing it wrong. It's sort of like over salting or over sweetening something, and there is definitely too much sometimes. And also, everybody has the same plugins, so everybody's already using those things. So my goal is to listen, and if you already have heaps of character, right, flavor, sauce on something, I'm not going to add anything because that's already there. My
Mm-hmm.
goal is to just sort of make that. Then I'm kind of looking, the more distortion you add to a song, while you can get it louder, you're losing the transients. It kind of has this softening that happens, and kind of sort of makes like the kick air and that kind of stuff fuzzier and more rounded. And that's pleasing to a point. But when you're really looking to grab somebody's attention, I tend to then go in and EQ that stuff so that it still has impact. And I don't add more flavor to that.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the long answer on that. But
Perfect.
when it's needed, I use it.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes people give me stuff that's very naked and it needs a little bit of sauce. So
Mm-hmm. And what would you use for that saturation distortion?
I like the Tone Projects stuff. Like the plugins for that are good. I have some hardware that I use as well. Whitestone adds like sort of a nice tube kind of dimensionality to stuff. Um, uh, that's pretty much it. I don't go nuts. You know what else is a secret weapon that I absolutely love, and I use it about 50% of the time. I find I use it in mid side.
Mm-hmm.
Is the Oxford inflator, which is a wonderful little thing. It's not really a saturator. It sort of messes with the waveform. So it sort of changes the shape of the wave,
Mm-hmm.
of the actual audio wave. It's sort of interesting. And I use it very lightly, but sometimes it's just excellent for kind of tightening things up. And again, it's like in mid side, sometimes it's specifically really useful and
Mm-hmm.
pleasing. So
Nice.
That's a few of them. Yeah.
Cool. Have you tried Baby Audio's plugins? They're designed to inspire creativity and enhance your music production experience. From their Crystalline River plugin, offering ultra clean reflex free of metallic artifacts, to Spaced Out, a hybrid reverb and delay workstation that combines over 50 individual effects. Baby Audio provides tools that can transform your sound. Right now, you can get an exclusive discount on all their plugins. Just use the code AGARTHA15 at checkout. Don't miss out. Click the link in the description and elevate your music today. What kind of metering tools do you use and how do you use them?
I mean, I kind of don't. For a long time, I didn't care about digital meters at all. And I still don't, but I think that they're good in terms of ballparking something, especially like if you want to know, generally speaking, if everything is sort of hitting the same range. I kind of don't really care about meters. I don't really find them very interesting. It's like whatever works for you. I mean, as long as they're not putting a sound on it, I don't really feel one way or the other about it. And I specifically look for, LUFS, I think is generally what everybody's looking at now. So I'll look at that and make sure it's not absolutely insane, just from my perspective. But again, that it's mostly I'm just relying on my hearing on it. And sometimes stuff sounds better a little quieter, and sometimes it sounds better just slammed. And it just kind of depends on the style and the genre and how it was recorded,
What are the best ways to fix the low end in a mix? And what are your favorite tools for doing that?
Well, I think the who makes the Pro Q3 and like that stuff, is it those plugins are great for that stuff. They have like a multi-band compressor. I can't remember the name of it right now.
FabFilter or the plugin?
Exactly. Thank you. It's FabFilter. FabFilter is great for sort of automating and sort of dialing in certain stuff. And I think that it's particularly good with dealing with, some of the sibilant issues intelligently, as well as sort of low end stuff. I like some of Ozone's stuff is great, right? Isotope. I generally don't use like their all-in-one stuff. I like the modules specifically. And some of that stuff is really great. For low end issues. A lot of it's EQ, just kind of, either sometimes pushing harder into a compressor with a boost will tighten the low end up. And, sometimes it's not, it's sort of counterintuitive how to fix a problem. And I'm usually try to avoid my biases and just kind of push and pull stuff until it works. And not really think about necessarily like, I should be subtracting here. It's like, maybe not. Maybe it needs a real sharp, Q boost into, again, like a limiter or a compressor, and that like solves the problem,
Lately I've been listening to mixes where all the low end or all the frequencies, the low frequencies are in mono. And it feels like it's overdone, and it's not, I don't know. It sounds like claustrophobic. Have you experienced that? And if so,
yeah. In fact,
can it be fixed?
That's an excellent thing, because everybody's heard about mono, right? And they're like, that makes it tighter and it makes it more focused. People are overusing it now. So you're right. It makes the mix sound less interesting. It has less air. So yeah, that can be fixed easily. There's Leapwing, I believe, makes a plugin called is it Stage 1?
Yeah, Stage 1.
Maybe.
Oh, Stage 1, is it?
Something like that. And it's absolutely wonderful. I think it's Leapwing. It could be wrong. Again, I'm really terrible with names and stuff. I just kind of like, I use stuff so often I just forget what it's called, But you can really anything, like I will unmono something and definitely sort of a little bit of a spread in the low end actually creates a little more room, and you don't lose impact. If you do it right, you can kind of shift some stuff around, you can it makes a big difference. So yeah, I'm not an automatically mono low end guy, because again, everybody's already read that blog or listened to that podcast, and everybody's like mono the low end, so then everybody does it. And guess what? I mean, you know this, for everybody that has a rule about, yo, you don't do this when you do this. Anybody who's working professionally in this business knows there is absolutely no rule, that really transcends every situation, or that it's even true 50% of the time. It's always program dependent and situational. And so there just really isn't, like, I know that sucks because everybody wants to have, like, this is the 5 things I always do. But that's a lot of the times it's not. You just kind of have to listen, and like I said, sometimes it's not instinctual.
So
Did I get too far off subject?
No, not at all.
Oh, okay.
So do you see mastering as something technical or more a mix between artistic and technical?
Well, I mean, to answer that question, hire 5 mastering people to do the same song, and then you tell me, right? Like, there is a good amount of creative flavor that goes on, a distinction between mastering engineers. And I mean, I have my favorites, mastering engineers that I listen to, and I go, that always sounds great to me. And there's other mastering engineers where I'm like, I can tell that it's them, and I don't really like it. So, yes, there is a technical.
I'm sorry. Can I interrupt for a second? Do you don't like those mastering engineers because that it's always them, or you don't like their taste?
There are mastering engineers that have a sound, and I like people who you don't know they've been there, but it sounds excellent. You know what I mean? Yeah. So there are people who they have a very specific thing that they go for, yeah, sometimes I just don't like that thing. It could be hyper compressed. It could be a very specific sort of boost in the mid range that I don't particularly find pleasing. And I know that it's them and not the mixer, but that's neither here nor there. I mean, these are people who are it's like anything. It's like food. People have a preference. And you should always hire somebody who kind of works on the things that you like, right? That's generally a good rule. Like, they're going to do, if you already know that you like a certain sound, you should be hiring people who produce that sound. My personal opinion, mastering should be transparent. Again, I would prefer you didn't know I was there. I'm interested in assisting and making sure that the artist's song and what's working about the song are the most obvious thing, the most presentable aspect of it when you listen to it. So that's my goal. Just philosophy every time I open up a song or a session.
So could you walk us through your mastering process step by step, from the moment you receive the song, the way you prep it before you start working on it, and finally deliver it to the artist?
Sure. So the first thing I like to do is I want to know, if you have a reference, that you feel like your song, you wanted it to be like, or that your mix engineer, you already had a conversation with your mix engineer and you expressed, I want this to sound like, Kendrick Lamar's latest hit or whatever, and that was your goal. I'd like to know that as well, so I know that sort of provides like an azimuth, with a compass, like a north. So I understand what the goal was here, whether it got there or not, so that gives me. The other thing is I like to have a faux master from you. Like, everybody got used to listening to this mix slammed, because that's how people want to hear the stuff when they're reviewing the mix. So I want to hear that version as well, I don't want any surprises, because sometimes what that version does to the mix is vastly different than the unprocessed mix. And I have no way of knowing that without hearing what both versions are. Sometimes the differences are negligible too, and that's great. But again, I just need to know, like, what is the context for all of this? What was the goal, and what were we comparing it to? That's very helpful, and that leads to not having a lot of miscommunication or misunderstandings going forward. If it's an album, I tend to do one song first to make sure that we're on the right track. And what I do is, the first thing I do is, I listen to it and I think about your commercial ref, hopefully, that you gave me. And then I think about stuff that I think sounds great that is in that genre. I have that stuff in the session as well that I'm able to review. So I kind of have a good idea of where we are and what's possible. And then I do volume rides. One of the very first thing I do is I do volume rides so that when I do apply any compression or limiting or coloring, that no one thing is hitting too hard to make stuff distort, right? So if there's a lot of dynamic range, that's great, but I kind of make sure that, like, the dynamic range is within a certain range so that nothing is overreacting. And then I also then in concert with that do I will do sectional EQ. So I will kind of go through and see, as songs get quieter and louder, especially as they're in the mix realm, as they're hitting a compressor, sonically they change, character-wise they change. So what sounds really great quiet could sound really bad, or just sound like not more harsh, depending on how it's hitting. And also just the way you play, and if it's harder and, things kind of break up more, that's fine, but it might require a different EQ section to section. And I'm not afraid to kind of do that and automate that. I don't do that if I don't have to. But again, like, if it's something that needs it. And a lot of times I feel like it does, just to kind of build some real solid consistency with the song. So again, nothing's really, once stuff starts getting compressed or limited, it's a way that is transparent is the goal. So you're not hearing, the song collapsing in and on itself as things get louder because the compressor's overreacting and things like that. And that's just a healthy combination of again, volume rides and EQ stuff often, And then tail end, I get to once I kind of have that stuff done, I then start to look at space. What sections could open up more? Is there a frequency that could use a little bit of panning out in a pleasant way, or reducing, depending on what we're dealing with, But I find that stuff I do towards the tail end, once I've kind of established a volume, because volume plays tricks on space as well, right? So when you really slam a song, it sounds much wider because it's just pushing everything forward. And it can also sound not as wide, depending on how slammed it is. So volume's key when you're kind of starting to do that stuff, because again, that can change very rapidly depending on even just a few extra dB here or there. But that's sort of my finishing sauce at the end. The other thing I play with volume is the release times, how fast or slow your limiter is, or sometimes limiters, has a big effect on the low end and the high end, and obviously how loud you can get it. And so all of that stuff becomes very important, and it's all it's all connected, in terms of how hard you're driving it. Again, it's connected to the stereo field and the depth and that kind of stuff. So I'm kind of playing with all of that stuff simultaneously at the same time. And that's the kind of the last bit. And then I'm slow in the sense that like, I don't like to work on something and then just send it back. I tend to I have a system where I'll work on something, then I'll put it away for a day and come back to it. And oftentimes there's that little 5% or 1% thing that I'll do differently at the end after sort of sleeping on it, after I've kind of been able to get some perspective on it. That makes all the difference to me. So, and then I send it back to you and cross my fingers.
So, do you think the perception of loudness changes depending on whether there's more information in the mid or the side of the mix?
I do, yeah. It's funny. Again, I've had circumstances where the song sounds louder when you have adjusted the mid and the side. Sometimes it's interesting. Sometimes I lower the volume of the sides, and it makes the song sound bigger and wider. And I think again, it's because everything's kind of then hitting the limiter at a different speed or a different way, right? And it allows for it to sound wider and bigger. It's just sort of interesting that way. It's again, it's sort of, I don't think it's intuitive. You wouldn't think that that's how it would work. You'd think, well, why would you lower the sides and then wouldn't the song become quieter or smaller? No, again, you're talking about really significant volume levels. Sometimes that makes the song breathe and changes the whole depth, and it does make it sound louder, believe it or not. So yes, that stuff has a major part, and mono is not the silver bullet for volume, doing that. I mean, it does some very wonderful things sometimes for sort of clearing up the low end and for adding a little extra punch. Sometimes it's the silver bullet, but it is definitely, I wouldn't say it's even 50% of the time for me. Messing with low end that way. Yeah.
How important is the first impression when you listen to a track?
You mean when they listen to a master, or
no,
you mean
for
when
you.
I listen to it?
When you listen not to the master, to the mix, like knowing what to do, or
I don't think I think about it like that. I mean, I know when I listen to something how much work it's going to be, I think. But I don't really have a lot of judgment about that stuff. I come from an artist background. I started out as a 15-year-old punk kid playing in bands. And I had a 4-track at home, and I would just crank out recordings all day long. And anybody who knows me could tell you some of that stuff sounded really terrible. But with a little guidance, it got good. And so I'm not really a snob about presentation or how well something is recorded. Some of my favorite records don't sound very good. I'm not sure that's that's my job, right? Is to make it sound as good as it can be. But I'm not a snob about people who don't necessarily have the best foot forward on that front, whether artistically or sonically, because I've heard some people start out really rough and get really good. So again, I feel like my job is to encourage and make you shine and wherever you're at. And that's it, really,
Can we talk about limiting? It's probably one of the topics that I get asked about the most. So how can you tell if you're using too much limiting, and what are the first negative effects?
Well, a pretty good sign would be if your attenuation meter is like hovering, just hovering at 6, dB deep into the red. That would be a pretty good sign. Like if just your relative general volume is just always 6 dB getting shaved off of that, that would be a red flag. I use a series of limiters. I don't use a lot of compression, and I do things in chains where it's little bits here and little bits there. So not any one thing is taking, shovel loads of dBs off.
Mm-hmm.
Um, the reason being that it's just audible. It's very audible when you're digging in deep with limiting, and you're in bad shape. Also, beyond just the attenuation thing, you're in bad shape when there is no fifth gear left, right? Like if you think about it in terms of transmission, like a car's transmission, you know, and loudness being driving really fast. Once you hit the top range, if there's not another gear left, and it still sounds like you're everything's, it's getting slower and not faster, right? With a car, you're doing it wrong. And so in this case with limiting, the harder it hits at a certain point, the less dramatic. Like, and for instance, generally speaking, right, you start out in a song, it's the intro, it's the first verse, and the first verse is going to be kind of quiet, right? And then you have a chorus, and then the second verse has got a little bit more going on, right? And it's not as quiet. It's like, okay, here we are, we're in the middle of the song. Well, by the third chorus or the outro, theoretically, right, that's the peak. That's going to be where it's the loudest and it's the most dramatic, and there's going to be the orchestral sweeps and the the 30-person chorus, singing along, and that's where like the fireworks, right? And if at that point the song is not loud because you have been just front loading the whole thing the whole time, that's how you know you're doing it wrong. The last chorus should be the loudest, and you need to gain stage everything to that point. And that goes for me and my job, that goes for mixing, that goes for every part of that build. Again, that's a formula. It doesn't have to, the song might not be that way at all. The second half could be really, really quiet. That's not my point. I'm just saying, like, if there's that maximum moment where it's supposed to be the loudest, most dramatic part of the song, and it's not, it falls flat, you got to figure that out, right? Like the verse can't be as loud as the chorus. It can look like it's as loud as the chorus, but it can't feel like it. It can't sound like it. And a lot of people make the mistake of just looking at the waveforms. That doesn't really mean anything either, You can have a brick wall, right? And when you're looking at it, but it still has a movement and a dramatic and a dynamic change in it. That's a good master. Doesn't matter if it's brick walled or not. I mean, by brick walled, like you're looking at it, it looks like a block, Yeah. So.
And what limiters are you using?
I like, it's funny. I've dabbled with a lot of them. I am particularly fond of the one that does the heavy lifting for me, and I'll probably get shit for this for people somewhere. I mean, there's always somebody who doesn't like something in the internet. But I like the Waves L3, which is like old timey. That thing's been around for 20 years. And before that, it was the L2. And they have a particular sound that I really like. So that one is kind of the one of the main ones I use, just sort of for fit. And I also like, Isotope's, is it Maximizer, which I will use a little bit of. I like it has a certain flavor too that I dig. Trying to think what else. Those are really the two off the top of my head that I'll mess around with a little bit. Sometimes there are others that I'll throw out. like the Weiss,
Mm-hmm.
if you're in
Yeah.
Germany, Weiss. I really like their stuff is great. Um, and I will mess with that too, depending on what the material needs. But
Mm-hmm.
those are the things. Again, I don't rely super heavily on limiting, but I do. That is, you know, those are my favorites for that stuff.
Mm-hmm. And for those just starting out, what's the easiest way to set up a limiter?
Well, I mean, limiters are super easy, right? I mean, what's the setup? It's like it's the threshold and a release time, and then maybe you've got some dither options and 24-bit. I mean, a limiter is the easiest thing in the world to use. In my opinion, the hard stuff is what you do to it before it hits the limiter, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if everything was just about the limiting, we wouldn't need me. There would be no need for mastering engineers. Just be like, it's fine, throw it through the limiter.
Mm-hmm.
Which, by the way, some people at record labels are like, it's fine, you don't need a mastering guy. Just isn't there like a maximizer, like a polisher? It's like, all right, sure.
Polisher.
You know,
Mm-hmm.
there's definitely people out there who think that like it's what's the big deal, which is fine. But it is. I'd like to think that my job is, if you were to take what I do and then just compare it to somebody who has no idea what they're doing and just throws a limiter on it, I'd like to think that there is a difference, and I'm pretty sure there is, but you kind of have to like go through that process to understand it.
Mm-hmm.
But if you can't hear the difference, who cares? Right? I mean, I'm like, who am I to tell you? It's like, being a snob about somebody who doesn't like a particular escargot or something. It's like, I don't care if you can't appreciate it.
Mm-hmm.
So
And what about oversampling?
I'm a fan. Yeah, the more you give your computer reign to kind of maximize all those little bits,
Mm-hmm.
the better. you know so yes, do it. If you can afford to do 96K 32-bit, do it. you know and all the plugins with processing, if you can oversample as much as you can. It's funny, that has a definite sound, right? And sometimes when I'm using certain plugins and they have the option to oversample and be like high fidelity, sometimes that doesn't sound as good, right?
Mm-hmm.
It just has they do have their own flavor and their tone, too. It adds or whatever. It adds something at at a lower sampling rate that actually is pleasing to the ear. So it's you know again, there aren't really any rules there. You do have to listen. So
And when it makes it's over compressed or limited, how can you bring some life and dynamics back?
again, I actually will volume ride that as well.
Mm-hmm.
I will kind of reduce it. I will kind of, I mean, these are conversations. If it's something that's really problematic, I will have a conversation with a mix engineer about it, or an artist, whoever touched it. Um, there's always politics people don't talk about in terms of the pecking order. So you have to. A mastering engineer has to be more than just a technician. There is a political aspect to it where you have to assume that what you got is what it is, and that's how they want it. And you need to have a conversation with them about that. Sometimes people are flexible about making changes to it, and sometimes they're not. Um, and that goes for mastering people as well, right? I mean, I know there's definitely mastering engineers who will not work on certain things unless you make changes to it. I'm not one of those, but I
Mm-hmm.
will kind of feel people out to see if they're amenable to making some changes. And if they just seem like, no, this is it, we're ready, you do your job, I'm like, cool. Now I understand what my position is. Like, this is what it is. Make it sound good. So then I will kind of go in and do some volume rides to kind of build back in some excitement. And again, I'll use EQ. I'll EQ certain sections so I can bring out maybe some of the transients that got. A lot of times there's some compression issues in a mix where it generally sounds really good. There's like a bus compressor, but then when the chorus hits, I can kind of hear it dip on the first hit, right? Because everything's like boom, and the compressor's timed in such a way as it just goes and dips down. And I can hear that. You can hear that when you start adding volume to stuff. It's not as noticeable sometimes when you're not mixing into a limiter. But when you're adding volume, you can really hear these where the compressor's doing this like, and so you're losing impact on those first hits. And I hate that. That sounds wrong to me. That's not how it sounds when you play it in real life, right? Mm-hmm. Everybody gets excited. They hit that chorus a little harder, they may even rush a bit, but if the compressor's kind of dipping it there, it's like sucking the energy out of the song, sucking the energy out of that exciting part. So I will go back in and automate, kind of push it up and even sometimes EQ it so it doesn't sound like it got flattened there. Stuff like that matters. Those little details, that stuff matters, and it's just easier for me to do it instead of going back to the mix engineer and saying, hey, change that. And sometimes that could be a can of worms. They take that compressor off or whatever, and then it doesn't have the same vibe or the glue. And then everybody's bumming and is and so it's like that thread with a sweater. You pull it and the whole thing unravels. You got to be careful with people about approaching changes like that especially when they've gotten used to hearing it a certain way. So I just kind of fix it and don't bring it up sometimes, that kind of stuff. So
do you think it's a good idea to decouple the left and the right channel on the limiter so they aren't limiting the same way?
That's a good question. Sometimes. Right? I mean, sometimes it's cool and sometimes it's like it doesn't work. It can make it interesting and it can definitely make stuff louder depending. I do play with that too in terms of decoupling the limiter or a compressor. So that again, there's, it's the same. It's actually, that is the same thing as adjusting the mid side, right? It's a very similar concept where you are if I drop the sides so the center is a little more prominent, the way that it hits the limiter, it changes and it sort of makes it a bigger sound. It's a very similar stuff that's going on there where you're decoupling things and kind of allowing it to exist in a little bit of a different way or hit the limiter in a different way. Sometimes is great, it just kind of frees things up and makes it sound looser and bigger. So yeah, I mean, play with it. Those are great tools, all of that stuff.
So you were talking about this before. Do you think it's beneficial for people to mix with the limiter on?
No, that's a weird question. I think sorry, I'm not great at giving definitive yes or no's.
Yeah, I know.
I think I think it's handy. I don't think you should necessarily get used to it, but I think it's good to have something there and pop it in and pop it off so that you understand what volume is going to do to it, and I think that's helpful. I don't think you should necessarily mix with a limiter on the entire time, but if it's not attenuating a ton and it's part of the sound, then you should absolutely use it if you like it. Sometimes that's part of the glue. And so I don't have a hard and fast rule about that. I think it's a mistake to work with it completely off or completely on. I think it's just another way of hearing a song and understanding what's going to happen maybe when you hit it with a lot of volume, when a guy, or a person like me comes in and hits it with a ton of volume, at least you're not surprised at what might happen, you know? And you might not want a ton of volume, and that's a different subject, but you know what I mean.
And in your experience, do people still care about their masters sounding loud, or is it less important now?
I mean,
is it still a thing?
I haven't lost a gig because my masters are too loud. But I've probably lost a good amount of gigs because my masters weren't loud enough. So, yes, it matters. I don't care what anybody says. And listen, all you need to do is go to your whatever you're listening, like go to the Apple store and pull down your 5 favorite songs right now. Throw them in your session, buy those songs, drop them in your session to where they're hitting on your meters. And that'll answer your question. All the popular stuff, all the stuff that you dig, even if it's not popular, like your favorite indie artist that nobody's ever heard of, chances are pretty good it's loud. Pretty good. There's still that sort of psychology with that stuff, and it will always be there. It's just human. And I just think it is what it is. Does it have to sound like shit? No. It can be loud and not sound like shit, but the loudness thing still matters. I don't care what anybody says.
And how loud do
Nobody ever gets a master of mine and says, turn it down. That's not a thing.
How loud do you like to listen while mastering?
Oh, I definitely work at low volume. Yeah. I want to protect my hearing so I can keep doing this till when I'm old or older. There's a sort of a sweet spot, I think, and it kind of depends on your room or your headphones, where like what you're getting is accurate, and then that can change depending on how low or much louder you get. So I'd like it. You kind of have to know like sort of what that sweet spot is for your particular situation. So you're getting an accurate reflection, of what's there.
And besides that, do you do anything to avoid I forgot the word, hearing fatigue or listening fatigue, ear fatigue?
I take breaks and I walk around. That helps in terms of ear fatigue, and it also helps in terms of perspective. So you don't get too myopic about it. Like there's a ton of tunnel vision that occurs, and sometimes when you're kind of chasing something, you can kind of lose focus about what is even really happening or what things are really doing. I always like to keep bypass handy on every, analog or plugin that I'm using, where just so I have, I'll get up after I've done some changes, walk around, get a drink, come back and listen. And then I'll bypass whatever it was I just spent some time doing to make sure that it's going in the, positive direction and not actually making it worse. People trick themselves, It's like there's a joke about, the fiddling around with a compressor for 30 minutes and then realizing that it's been in bypass the whole time. That's a real thing. We've all done it. It sucks, but it goes to show like your tricks on you. Like you think things are changing when you're like dialing stuff in, and it might not be changing for the better if that thing is not in bypass or is, so you got to just be careful with stuff like that.
Yeah, for sure. And what's something about mastering you've learned over the years that you wish you knew when you first started?
Everything. I mean, when I started, I was just winging it. I was kind of out of a band and was kind of taking a stab at mixing and producing. And I had a friend who wanted to master a record and didn't have $5,000, for it, which is how it was back in the day. And I was like, how hard could it be? It's all the same tools. Bring it over. Let's do it. And I think that became like a lifelong love affair for me. Like I just immediately was good at thinking about songs and in that aspect, and the stereo, like just messing with a stereo mix, a final mix, like that really spoke to me, and I was really good at fiddling with that stuff in a way that I was not good at mixing. And I'm not a mix engineer. Like some people are good at wearing a lot of hats. I'm not one of them. Like I am very specific and specialized. That's what I do, and I'm good at it. Um, and So I think I dove in and learned all I could, but it was a black art, right? And they still kind of refer to it that way. It's not anymore. You can
Mm-hmm.
do an online lesson and people tell you all their tricks. It's not a black art. But it was back in the day, because you could go to Berkeley 25 years ago. They didn't talk about mastering really. There wasn't really mastering courses, I don't believe. That's a fairly newer sort of thing. I wish maybe I had that, but I don't know. I kind of liked stumbling around in the dark and figuring it out. You
Mm-hmm.
know, that's part of the fun, and I still kind of view it that way. I still occasionally just kind of throw out everything I've been doing and just go, let's learn something new today and let's see what this does. And I think that's important for anybody to do with their stuff. And especially now, there's so many tools and so many things out there. It's a easy thing to learn, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and it's fun.
Hans, thank you so much. It's been an absolute pleasure having you on the show.
Well, likewise, Jose. I really appreciate it. They're great questions, and I love your podcast. And yeah,
Mm-hmm.
it's been a real pleasure.
Thank you so much.